Welcome to Unit 9 of EDSE 512. You'll notice that there is a great deal of very important content to cover in this unit, so we're going to touch on some of that here in this video, and then you'll have the opportunity to independently go through the resources throughout the week. The main topics listed here in the course schedule for Unit 9 are accommodations and modifications, extended school year services, a very important topic in special education, and state and district assessments. So these are three of the key components within an IEP. You'll have reading to address that will be indicated throughout the module in Canvas, and you also will have the assignment of IEP critique number 3, continuing on information that has been provided to you previously, and we've got new content to critique for this IEP document. After this critique, we'll move into case study work again for Unit 10. So in this one-week unit, you'll see that there's a great deal to cover. It's helpful to break this down perhaps by days and figure out an area of focus for each day as you move through the course content. That may be helpful for focus. So as always, we've got lecture handouts here, a parent brochure that you can review. This content in the PowerPoint regarding accommodations, modifications, and differentiation, another important topic in special education, will help you to identify differences between these. And for the record, it's important to recall modification, as we know with the word modify, that's referring to changing the content or the curriculum or the standard for achievement. So a student who's working off of alternative standards, for instance, perhaps in significant support needs programming, may have a modification to the general education assignment or content or curriculum. But a student who is not working on alternative standards would be provided with an accommodation. Probably the best and most common example of an accommodation is extended time. Lots of students might be given 1.5 times for an assignment. Time and a half is what it would be referenced as. So for instance, if there's a test and it's timed and students have 60 minutes to complete it in the class, the student with the accommodation in the IEP would then receive 90 minutes. That's time and a half. So 100% plus 50% of that. That would be an accommodation because the test is not changed. The requirements of the student are not changed. The content is not changed, but the accommodation allows the student extended time. For instance, if there's challenges with focus or processing, or if there's a learning disability that might impact the student's ability to read or calculate speedily, for instance. And all of that, of course, would be referenced based on the results of the most recent evaluation and eligibility determinations. So again, as we just discussed, the definition of modification, changes or adaptations to the program, and that would be altering what we're looking at for content or the level of mastery or assessment that is provided to a student. And as mentioned, this would be pretty rarely occurring. Much more often we will see accommodations, particularly for students who are in mild to moderate needs programming or even affective needs or serious emotional disability center-based programming. You might see students with cognitive disabilities who are working off of these alternative standards. And that would be the extended evidence outcomes. Ooh, this is a good slide actually here previously. The extended evidence outcomes provide an example here of an EEO for math that is related to functional academics and life skills, compared to what might be required of a student in general education curriculum. You can browse those, of course, further on the Colorado Department of Education website, but you can see the example is provided here in this PowerPoint. Accommodations, as we discussed, this is not altering the instructional level or the curriculum. It just removes the barriers. Another accommodation other than extended time might be copies of teacher notes provided in advance. It might be opportunity to work in a quiet separate space. It might be frequent breaks for movement. There are many different accommodations. Another one that might be popular is the chance for a student to bring and use a fidget perhaps, or something to support with focus of that nature, or even just to stand up and take stretch breaks throughout a class that might not be prompted or provided to other students. So this is not changing the curriculum. You can see that the playing field is not leveled, and that's this visual provided here for you just as kind of a graphic break here in the presentation. The curriculum is not made easier, but the playing field is leveled. So we think about equity and access. That's the main idea here in accommodations. This is a great slide too. We're not going to go through the entire presentation here, but remember with accommodations, you're going to be changing something, and it's often going to be an adjustment to the way that you're either teaching or assessing one of these 4 words: input, output, rate, or support. And input would be, what are we giving to them? So again, instead of just a lecture, we might give students a copy of notes beforehand or closed notes where they're filling in the blank rather than starting from scratch with a piece of paper. So what are we giving to them? Do we need to make an adjustment to the output? What are we requiring from them? So we might say multiple modes of presentation or demonstration of knowledge, and that could be the option for oral presentation would be input if it's teacher read instructions or directions on a test, but the output adjustment might be the student can present knowledge verbally rather than composing a written submission in a particular situation, or is not required to create a video, but rather can do something hands-on if technology is a barrier. It's just an example. Rate, so as mentioned, additional time. You could do frequent checks for understanding. That's a common accommodation that you might see. Preferential seating, you could argue that that's related to input. You also could argue that it is related to support, because if the student can't complete work at the same pace or rate or accuracy independently, we might look at what we can put in place, and frequent checks for understanding or preferential seating might be a part of that to just support focus and work pace and completion. So accommodations really are adjustments to how content is taught and assessed rather than the content itself. Another visual for you here. And there is an IRIS module. This IRIS website really is quite invaluable. So please take the time to go through this IRIS module that focuses on accommodations. That'll provide you with even more clarification. And there is a module related to modifications listed there in Canvas as well. We have a module on assistive technology, and you can see there are many different types of assistive technology or different options. They could be no tech, low tech, or high tech. And oftentimes we'll see high tech assistive technology in, for instance, software that helps with word completion and autocorrect, text to speech, speech to text. This might be implemented on a standardized test, or it may be utilized in the classroom, and oftentimes it'll be both of those things for a student depending upon need. It also might be a device to help with communication, and we may also be thinking about captions, for instance, on a video. Here's a document addressing functional behavior assessment and behavior intervention planning. UNC does offer additional in-depth coursework. Colorado Department of Education also offers some information and trainings regarding these topics, which could be self-paced or more formal. So check out the CDE website, as well as speaking with your advisor regarding coursework at UNC that more clearly or with more of a focus addresses the FBA BIP process. That's not the main idea in this course, but we do want to address it. So there is a document listed here. It is an important part of IEP planning for many students. And as mentioned, with the alternate standards or the extended evidence outcomes, as we talked about, here's a document related to that. Review it for your own state if you're not in Colorado for those extended evidence or alternative standards for students who perhaps have significant needs programming. And again, that is a very small percentage of students with IEPs. Additional valuable links for you. And here we are on IEP development, the most important part of our course, and this has been the focus of our critiques and our case studies. We will continue on with it. So the service delivery statement is a part of an IEP that describes what the student will receive, where, how much, and why. How does it connect to the goals or the results of the most recent evaluation? So you'll see an example here, who's providing it and in what setting. This will show basically the IEP document is highlighting what are the areas of need, the impact of the disability, and now the service delivery statement is saying, what are we going to do about it? So you want this to be as detailed as possible, and an example is provided to you in blue. Thinking about this little graph here, this will populate within your IEP as well. So you'll type your narrative into the service delivery statement box, and then this will indicate the minutes or hours. This is dependent upon your setting and the level and how that might be recorded. You may go per day, per week, or per month. But all of that will be addressed here within this graphic, which you can create as you're writing an IEP. So this is a different way to demonstrate the information that was written in the blue blurb on the previous page. How many minutes per week, per month, per day, etc. And who will be providing it and where. So there are several different settings that we might consider, and we've got to figure out, do we believe, based on the results of the most recent evaluation, all of the present levels of performance and the services that are warranted and needed for that student, that the general education class, at least 80% of the time, is the appropriate, least restrictive environment, or 40 to 79% of the time, or less than 40% of the time. A student in a less than 40% of the time setting may be attending, for instance, a separate school. That could be a school targeting emotional behavioral support. That could be perhaps a student who is self-contained for a time in a center-based program due to significant needs, maybe safety concerns, or dependent upon the level. So some students in significant support needs programming might be lower than 40%, which isn't wrong. It's all dependent upon the need of the student. And of course, we want to see inclusion in general education as much as possible. So we have to here at length discuss the reason that we have selected this placement, the possible advantages for the student, and the possible disadvantages. Again, the examples in blue will show you what this might look like. This is then related to the educational setting. So you'll see many checkboxes here for students 6 to 21, which many of us are working with. We will see the numbers we just discussed, 80%, 40 to 79, and less than 40. The boxes above would be related to early childhood programming. So you want to select the option that is accurate for the student at this time. In this box, please always consider something. You may see no other factors considered, but it is better to include information if there's anything that you can say. There's almost always something. So really look through the parent-student input, the teacher feedback. What is another factor that might be considered? And what is the reason rejected? For students who are receiving services and they're in transition in those 15 plus IEPs, we have to consider what will be in place for the student to support readiness for post-secondary goals, and that would or could be post-secondary education and training, post-secondary employment goal, and independent living as appropriate. So you'll need to answer every question. What are those goals, and how will the school support them? And so you'll see that this page here in Canvas goes through each of these and it discusses what this might look like. As mentioned, there is information regarding the behavior intervention plan, several other factors that might apply to a student. So we were looking through these in the previous critique. This could be a communication plan, assistive technology. These are basically many other events or forms that might be relevant for a student with an IEP, and you might encounter them on a given IEP or not. So be sure to look through them. Finally, we have our critique 3 here, and that is our assignment for the unit. So we'll pull up the critique 3 form, and we'll pull up the Andrew Smith document, which I provided to you here as attachments. All right, so here is this document. You're becoming quite familiar with these, and you'll see this is for student Andrew Smith, which may be familiar to you. We're critiquing the goals and objectives for this critique number 3. All of the sections listed here, this is just like what you were doing before. The service delivery statement, which we just discussed, the placement in the LRE, the least restrictive environment, and the prior written notice section, and that's it. So you'll need to go through each of those columns, go through the document provided to you, indicate whether this is covered within the document, and why or why not you have selected that option. So it's just like what you've done before. Please keep an eye on the rubric and the prompts. Reach out with any questions, and remember, more detail is always better. Thank you.